When we think of Pythagoras, what comes to mind is the triangle equation, the theorem we all learned in school. But that was just the surface. The real Pythagoras was far more than a mathematician. He was an initiate in the Egyptian mysteries, a prophet of the soul, a master of the invisible. Few people know, but Pythagoras founded an initiatic school, a true temple of silence, where disciples would spend years in absolute silence before receiving even the smallest instruction. Because what was taught there was not meant for everyone. It was dangerous knowledge, powerful, forbidden. In this video, we're diving into the mysteries he left hidden, the secrets that never made it into school textbooks, the forbidden teachings of Pythagoras about the soul, numbers, the harmony of the cosmos, and spiritual transmigration, a map to liberation, buried under centuries of rationalism. Long before Pythagoras was remembered as the creator of a theorem hardly anyone uses outside school, he was known for something much deeper, his listening. Pythagoras believed the entire universe was moved by vibrations, that everything, absolutely everything, is sound. Not the sound we hear with our ears, but an invisible harmony that sustains the cosmos. According to ancient accounts, like those of Iamblichus and Philolaus, Pythagoras claimed that the planets produced sounds as they moved. Each celestial body, with its own speed and trajectory, emitted a specific note. Together, these notes formed what he called the music of the spheres, a cosmic symphony. We don't hear it, they said, because we've been immersed in it since birth, like a fish unaware of the water around it. To understand this vision, we must forget what we've been taught about numbers as cold and lifeless things. Pythagoras saw numbers as forces. For him, the number 1 was the origin of everything. 2 brought duality and conflict. 3 created harmony. 4 organized the material world, and so on. Each number had a function in the balance of the universe. They weren't just tools to count sheep. They were the hidden gears of reality. This relationship between number and sound became clear to him by observing musical instruments. He noticed that pleasant musical notes always followed exact proportions, 2 to 1, 3 to 2, 4 to 3, and then came a powerful insight. These proportions didn't just organize music, they organized nature. What sounded good to the ears reflected a deeper order, present throughout the cosmos. This discovery makes Pythagoras far more than a mathematician. He was, in truth, one of the first to understand that the universe has structure, that there are patterns behind apparent chaos. And those patterns aren't just in the stars, they're within us as well. That's why his teachings didn't stay theoretical. He and his disciples used sound as a spiritual practice. They believed certain melodies could calm the mind, balance the body, even heal illness. Before sleep, they used specific music to cleanse their thoughts. Upon waking, other music to align the spirit with the new day. Music was medicine. It was prayer. It was inner discipline. Today, science is catching up to these ideas. Modern physics speaks of vibration as the foundation of matter. Cellular biology studies how sound affects cells. Sound therapies and healing frequencies are making a comeback. But Pythagoras was already talking about this over 2,000 years ago, when it was still dangerous to say the universe had a soul. His teachings on universal harmony weren't just about notes and sounds. They were about living in tune with the whole, finding the rhythm of life, of breath, of thought, aligning oneself with nature, with others, with one's own being. That's why he emphasized balance. Because for Pythagoras, to live well was to live in harmony, and to harmonize above all meant to listen to the world, to the body, to the silence between words. He used to say that the deepest knowledge isn't transmitted through books, but through vibrations. And maybe that's why, even today, when something truly touches us, we say, "That resonated with me." Pythagoras understood the universe as a harp, and us as strings within it. When we are out of tune, we feel pain. But when we vibrate in the right tone, everything flows. And maybe, in that moment, without realizing it, we become just another subtle note in the eternal music of the cosmos. For Pythagoras, the body was not the end of the journey. It was only a temporary station. The true identity of a human being did not lie in the flesh, nor in the name, nor in the biography. It resided in the soul. He believed the soul is immortal, and that it goes through cycles of birth, death, and rebirth in different forms of life. This idea is called metempsychosis, or in more familiar terms, reincarnation. But the concept Pythagoras taught was more subtle than that. The soul, according to him, not only survives death, but also carries impressions from previous lives. It moves like a lit flame, changing containers with each existence, but preserving something of the original fire. And the quality of the next life depends on how we live this one. This vision didn't come from nowhere. Pythagoras studied for years in Egypt, where priests taught that humans were composed of several parts: physical body, vital energy, mind, spirit, shadow, and that after death, each part followed a different path. He was also influenced by the Orphic mysteries of Greece, where the soul was seen as a temporary guest in a limiting body. That's why Pythagoras said the body was a prison, not in a negative sense, but as something that demands discipline, an opportunity to learn, refine, transform, like a laboratory where the soul is tested, shaped, tempered. The Pythagoreans believed the soul needed to be purified to escape the cycle of rebirth. This purification didn't come through public rituals, but through daily silent practices focused on self-control and self-knowledge. Non-violent diet, orderly thinking, carefully chosen words, music to uplift the spirit. All of this was part of what we might call inner alchemy today. That was the true alchemy for Pythagoras, not turning lead into gold, but ignorance into wisdom. Not changing external matter, but transmuting the soul from within. And the soul is only purified when it breaks free from ego, impulse, blind repetition. Metempsychosis was also a lesson in humility. For Pythagoras, you could have been a king in one life and a servant in the next, a philosopher today and an animal tomorrow, because the soul learns in all forms. Every living being is a vessel of consciousness. That's why he and his disciples abstained from eating meat, not for dietary reasons, but out of compassion. Today, this vision still resonates in Eastern traditions, like Hinduism and Buddhism. But for the Greeks of that era, it sounded radical. Saying the soul didn't die with the body was already bold. Saying it could return as a fish or a tree was nearly heretical. Even so, Pythagoras insisted, the purpose of life is not merely to live, it is to free oneself. Free oneself from ignorance, from the automatic cycle of desires, from unconscious repetition. And that only happens when the soul remembers who it truly is. He called this process anamnesis, the recollection of essence, as if the soul knew everything from the beginning, but forgot it at birth. And philosophy, music, silence, number, all of these serve to help it remember. In essence, Pythagoras wasn't teaching mathematics. He was offering a map, a path for each person to stop being a prisoner of the body and start becoming a pilgrim of the soul. Pythagoras didn't found a typical school. He created a spiritual community, a kind of temple disguised as a philosophical academy, where knowledge was transmitted not only through words, but through gestures, silence, and way of life. This community emerged in the city of Croton, in southern Italy, where he gathered disciples from across the Greek world, men and women, young and old, all willing to abandon ordinary life in search of harmony. But that harmony didn't come for free. To be accepted into the Pythagorean school, a candidate had to undergo a rigorous selection process. In the first stage, they were not allowed to speak, for weeks, months, or even years. Their only task was to listen. Because, as Pythagoras taught, before speaking wisely, one must learn to listen attentively. Silence was more than a test. It was a ritual, a way to slow down the mind, to perceive one's internal noise, to realize how many unnecessary words we speak, and to prepare the body and soul for something greater. Only after this period would the disciple receive the first teachings, and even then, never all at once. Knowledge was granted in stages, according to each one's inner maturity. Those who passed this phase were admitted to the inner order. From that point on, their lives changed radically. They awoke and slept at exact times, ate simple and regulated food, and devoted themselves to the study of mathematics, music, astronomy, and meditation. They lived in community, yet maintained deep spiritual individuality. It was like a monastery without a religion. There were rites, but they were not spectacles. They were exercises in awareness. For example, the contemplation of the pentagram, a sacred symbol of the order, was a frequent practice. Oaths also carried special weight. One of the most sacred was sworn upon the tetractys, a triangle formed by the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, whose sum is 10, the number of totality for the Pythagoreans. This symbol was not just geometric. It was spiritual. It represented the hidden structure of the universe, and swearing upon it meant committing to the pursuit of truth in every level of life. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of the Pythagorean order was that it wasn't limited to knowledge. It shaped complete human beings. Pythagoras believed that knowledge without ethics was useless. That's why every member of the order was trained to cultivate virtues like justice, temperance, courage, and moderation. They weren't looking for smart people. They wanted attuned souls. Over time, members of the school began to influence politics in Croton and neighboring cities. Many became leaders, advisors, reformers. But not everyone was pleased. The Pythagoreans began to be seen as a secret sect, controlling politics from the shadows. And in a world where power is fought over with ambition, a school based on virtue and wisdom quickly became a threat. Tension grew. The order was attacked. The temple was burned. Some members were killed. Pythagoras fled. And with him, many of the school's secrets vanished. But the impact remained. And what survived reached us in fragments. Short phrases, accounts from disciples, symbols carved in stone. As if the order had been dismantled on the outside, but kept alive on the inside, in the minds and hearts of those who had heard the silence and understood its value. Today, it may seem strange that a school like this ever existed. But perhaps what's truly strange is that we now live in a world that no longer values silence, listening, discipline, and inner transformation. In the order of Croton, philosophy wasn't just an idea, it was a practice. It shaped how you slept, how you ate, how you related to time, and this made every gesture, even the simplest, an act of tuning yourself to the cosmos. Pythagoras saw numbers with different eyes. To him, they weren't just symbols for counting things or solving practical problems. They were far more than tools. They were living entities, fundamental principles of reality. Each number, Each geometric shape, each proportion, revealed something about the workings of the cosmos and the soul itself. That's why he said, "Everything is number." And when he said that, he wasn't playing with words. He meant something that even today remains beyond ordinary mathematics. For Pythagoras, numbers were the invisible structure behind everything that exists. From music to planets, from the human body to thoughts. Think of an architect. To design a building, they need measurements, angles, symmetry. But Pythagoras went further. He believed the universe itself was designed based on mathematical proportions. In other words, before matter, there was relation. Before form, there was number. And this wasn't just a belief. He and his disciples investigated it deeply. They studied the proportions of the human body, sacred geometric forms, the orbits of celestial bodies. They searched for patterns. And whenever they found harmony, a proportion that repeated in nature, in art, in music, they saw it as a message from the universal order. Geometry was sacred because it revealed the invisible through the visible. A spiral, a triangle, a circle, each figure carried a teaching. Studying these shapes was, to them, like conversing with the divine. The most revered symbol among the Pythagoreans was the tetractys, a triangle formed by the sum of the first four numbers, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 10. This 10 was not just a round number. It was the synthesis of all things. The point, 1, the line, 2, the plane, 3, and the volume, 4. Everything that exists can be described through these four basic dimensions. Together, they reveal the whole. Disciples would swear upon the tetractys as if it were a sacred scripture. And in a way, it was, because it represented the idea that reality has a pattern, that nothing is random, that there is intelligence behind creation. This vision didn't die with Pythagoras. It influenced the entire Western esoteric tradition. The Kabbalists, for example, saw in numbers a bridge between God and the world. Alchemists designed their experiments based on geometric proportions. And even today, in the architecture of temples, churches, and sacred monuments, we see echoes of this divine mathematics. Modern science is beginning to rediscover these ideas in new forms. Quantum physics shows that particles behave in mathematically predictable ways. Biology reveals that DNA follows proportional patterns. Digital art is built on fractals, infinite geometric repetitions. Everything seems to lead back to the same conclusion Pythagoras reached 2,500 years ago. There is a code behind everything. But this code is not just technical. It is aesthetic. It is spiritual. As if the universe is not just a machine, but a work of art that knows it is being created. A creation made with equations. But that speaks to the heart. And when you begin to perceive these patterns, in the sky, in music, in everyday gestures, something changes. You begin to live differently, with more presence, with more reverence, with the sense that there is order, even when everything appears chaotic. That's what Pythagoras wanted to teach. Not formulas to memorize, but a gaze to awaken. What you heard here is not a theory. It is a calling. Pythagoras didn't want to be worshipped. He wanted to be understood. And to understand him, it takes more than reason. It takes inner silence. We live in a world of constant noise. But as he once said, true knowledge is found in the sound that is not heard, in the number that vibrates without being written, in the triangle that pulses between body, soul, and spirit. The forbidden teachings of Pythagoras were not destroyed. They merely went into hiding. In the proportions of temples, in the rhythm of the breath, in the echo of a distant bell. If you've heard this music, perhaps you're ready to walk the path. Thank you for watching.